Channel open. Welcome back to Weekly Trek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network, and presented in partnership with TrekCore.com. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on May 12th, 2023, and is current through Star Trek Picard Season 3, so beware of spoilers. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
Weekly Trek is a regular news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. We are in a new golden age of Star Trek. There are 5 television shows in production, possibly more on the way, and enough merchandise to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me, and I'll help you sort the real facts from lots of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. But I can't do this alone, and my guest this week is Madeline Potts. Madeline, welcome to Weekly Trek.
Woohoo! I'm happy to be here.
All right, Madeline. Well, I ask my guests this question every week. I want to know something that's got you excited about Star Trek at the moment. What's got you moving at Warp 10?
I have to say it's going to be Strange New Worlds Season 2. Season 1, just give everyone a little bit of background. I got into Trek later in life. I was like 10 or 11, and it was because of the Kelvin Timeline reboot movie.
All right.
No one loved. So when they announced Strange New Worlds, I hadn't been big into Trek for years. It kind of had like fallen off my radar. And I have never been like kicking your feet up with joy, so excited about a show than I was for Strange New Worlds Season 1. So I'm ready.
And which was your favorite episode of the first season?
It has to be, I know it has such a clever name, and Amok Time. The one with T'Pring and Spock.
Spock Amok.
Spock Amok, yes. I'm so excited for that. Like, that was the best one last season.
And since you're a big Kelvin Timeline fan, can I infer that Spock's your favorite character, or do you have a different favorite character on Strange New Worlds?
I am a big Spock girly. I think that's really what drew me in. But yeah, on Strange New Worlds, I'm really into Chapel. I love what they're doing with her.
Yeah, she's awesome. And I guess that would make sense, right? If you're a Spock and Chapel fan, Spock and Mark certainly comes to the top of the list in terms of episodes to pick from.
100%. That episode was just so clever and so fun to watch. But that whole season, I just think it was a perfect season of television.
And is there anything you think you are particularly wanting to see or looking forward to seeing in season 2?
Oh, I don't know. I want them to surprise us. I'm really excited to see our good old boy, Captain Kirk.
Sure.
And I want to see his relationship with Spock. I will be honest, I'm a little bit of a Spock shipper.
Okay, that's no problem. That's very cool.
I know it's controversial, but I just want to see where they go with it, because I know at SDCC they were hinting towards that. I don't think it will ever happen in canon, but I love to be queer baited by them.
Hey, if you're going to get queer baited over something, like the OG queer baiting is probably the way to go, right?
Yes, 100%.
That is awesome. Well, let me tell you what I'm feeling good about Star Trek this week, which is the Star Trek Prodigy Playmates action figures are finally shipping. The first 4, Dal with Murph, Zero, Jankum-Pog, and Gwyn. And I got the first 4 in, and actually, Gwyn's still sitting in a box. I haven't taken her out yet. But Dal, Zero, and Jankum, I have ripped out of the packaging, and I put them up on my shelf, and I think they are amazing. There's something to be said for like action figures that, you're sort of action figures that are doing like regular people are obviously really hard to do because it's hard to get the sculpts just right so that they look like the characters. But when you're doing animated characters, like for the Prodigy figures, it's so much easier because their expressions are a bit more exaggerated, and like these look just like the characters on the show, which I love. They are definitely like, of all the Star Trek action figures I have ever owned, I think these are the most detailed and the ones that are most like, well, I mean, unless you buy the $200 X06 ones, these are the most detailed and the coolest that I've seen. And so now I really can't wait for hologram Janeway, and I really, 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 really want them to announce the Rock Tuck, because they've not done that one yet, and because I just really want the whole season 1 gang together. Like, there are cool accessories that come with them. The Zero, for example, I didn't realize this when I got the figure. The legs are removable, So you can either have him with legs or without legs. And if you have him without legs, there's a little plastic stand that you can, that sort of lifts him up so that it looks like he's hovering. So yeah, if you were on the fence about getting the Prodigy action figures, because they were announced ages ago and then there was no news about them, they are finally shipping. You can get them now pretty much anywhere. Amazon's where I got mine, and they were very decent, very, very decent price. Go get them because they're really cool and I want more of them. So other people go get them too. Yeah, so that's what I'm feeling good about Star Trek this week. Do you have any merchandise of your own, Madeline?
Yes, I do. First of all, I want to see a photo of your action figure collection because I love seeing people's collections.
Oh, sure.
But my favorite thing I have is back at my parents' house, because my New York apartment does not allow for all of my collectibles. I have a little plaque that is an exact replica of the dedication plaque on the USS Enterprise. And
I love that. Which one?
I can't tell you exactly. But I will find a photo of it and you will probably be able to school me and tell me exactly what it is. I just bought it like randomly at a Comic-Con and I was like, that is really cool and I want it. I don't know the details, but I want it.
That is awesome. I love that. All right. Well, with that, let's turn to the week's top stories.
There's a war going on and I'm a reporter.
Well, for the first time since 2007, the Writers Guild of America, the union representing film and television writers in the United States, has gone on strike. After failing to reach a last-minute agreement with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, television and movie writers across the country have taken to the picket line to demand fair wages in an industry that has been totally revolutionized by the expansion of streaming television. And while the writers' strike, which I fully support and stand in solidarity with the demands of the Writers Guild, is unlikely to have any effect on the premiere of Strange New Worlds Season 2 on June 15th, or the debut of Lower Decks Season 4 or Prodigy Season 2 later this year, there may be impacts of the strike felt on the Star Trek franchise in 2024. After receiving an initial pickup for the show's third season last month, Star Trek Strange New Worlds was set to start filming again this summer, but the latest indications are that filming may have been delayed. We know that the showrunners are on the picket line. We were expecting it to have started filming already, but social media places several of the show's stars not in Toronto. And while writing is likely complete on the third season, that would mean that they could shoot the scripts they have. There are often lots of small rewrites to scripts that happen on set in the middle of shooting to account for production challenges or other factors. A line's just not working, or it's obvious that they need to add a line of dialogue for a particular reason. And so even though they could start filming Strange New Worlds Season 3 now, it's probably a good thing that they haven't, because with the writer's strike, you can't do any of those on-the-fly rewrites. You have to shoot the script that you finished in the writer's room. Lower Decks and Prodigy should not be affected by the writer's strike, as animation writers fall under a different union than the Writers Guild of America. It's also not clear what impact this strike will have on Discovery Season 5, though it is expected to be very minimal. The season has finished filming, and though there is supposed to be a small amount of filming to turn the season finale into a series finale, which, according to reports, may or may not actually have already happened, it's not clear if that was written prior to the strike or not, and when that is planned for. The show that is likely to experience the biggest potential impact of the strike will be Starfleet Academy. The show, which was in the middle of its first season being written, currently has an empty writer's room because all of those writers, including Lower Decks actor and newly minted WGA member Tawny Newsome, are on the picket line. The length of the strike and whether it's possible to accelerate the show's development and production to account for the delays are the factors that will impact whether we see Starfleet Academy next year or not. It is also unclear if the strike goes on for a while if it will impact Section 31. We do not know how far along the script for that movie was before the strike started. All in all, the impact on Star Trek will be pretty minimal in the short term, but we might see some longer breaks between shows next year to account for however long the strike lasts. And given, it seems, how far apart the two sides are, this might be a strike that goes on for a while. But the impact on Star Trek is obviously much less important than ensuring a fair deal for writers, and so we wish them good luck in getting what they deserve. Madeline, what was your reaction to the news of the Hollywood writer's strike, and what impact do you think it'll have on Star Trek?
So I remember when 2007 happened and how
R.I.P. Heroes Season 2.
Oh gosh, I know it absolutely gutted so many great shows, and I'm all for equitable wages for all. I think it's really important, especially in entertainment, because I think a lot of people are severely underpaid in entertainment. And I think it's really interesting that a lot of people have been twisting it to talk more about the AI aspect of the fear that AI is going to come into these writers' rooms and like try to write the scripts, which personally I don't think is going to happen. But I'm also really hopeful with this strike, and I think it's going to have a trickle down effect because we're seeing SAG-AFTRA really coming in and showing their support. We're seeing, I mean, on TikTok, I've watched a few TikToks of productions where like 3 people on the crew have said, hey, we're not working today in support of WGA, and everyone has just sat there until producers have let them go home. So I think hopefully this is going to be a shorter strike, but also that it's really going to create change.
Yeah, it's interesting you mention the Screen Actors Guild as well, because in addition to the writers now being on strike, I guess the Actors Guild contract comes up next month, and I think then the directors contract comes up. I think it might be in June as well. And so you do have theoretically the possibility that additional unions will be going on strike against the studios. And that really would ground things to a halt, right? I mean, if the actors go on strike, that would shut down any kind of voice recording on Lower Decks season 5 and on Prodigy season 2, if they're not finished with that yet. And if the directors go on strike, then there won't be any sort of live action filming. I mean, not that it sounds like Strange New Worlds is going to move forward in the short term anyway with the writer's strike happening. So yeah, I mean, it does sort of feel like we're at a bit of an inflection point in Hollywood related to the entertainment industry. And to your point, right, it's sort of, you know, from what I have been reading about the strike, it does sort of feel like it's very much a consequence of the writer's current deal is set up for a world in which most television is either on broadcast networks or cable TV and not on streaming. And that, you know, it was sort of set up under this assumption that writers get paid for their work and then they get paid for how many times the episodes broadcast on television. But because episodes aren't showing on television anymore and there's not really that kind of setup for streaming, you just get paid for it up front and then you don't get paid for however many times people actually watch the show on streaming. That has really kind of sort of gutted the heart out of most writers' paychecks and, you know, has taken it from a career that you can have a living in. Obviously, some do extremely well and become very rich, but most don't, right? But like a career that you could make a living out of to a career that has become increasingly more difficult. And so this does feel like, you know, an important moment to address that, because there's not going back to broadcast television and cable. The streaming era is here to stay. It's certainly having its own challenges, but like streaming networks aren't going anywhere. Netflix is not going anywhere. Paramount Plus is not going anywhere. Disney Plus is not going anywhere. And so the writers need to get the best deal that they can for the next decade and a half of the way the TV industry functions before it all changes again. And we have to keep, you know, sort of struggling to catch up.
Yeah, I agree. And to be transparent, I work for a media company. I work in corporate based role. So I'm not a creator or anything like that. But I did go to a conference a few months ago, and it was such an interesting argument going on whether or not we were going to keep linear television, if we're going completely to streaming, what's going to go on there. And it's interesting to me because I hope that it just becomes equitable across the board for everyone. Because like when you're looking at streaming and you're looking at linear television and who watches it, it's just kind of, I mean, I thought about this when they started showing Star Trek on only, like, do you remember they had CBS Premium Access when they started?
Oh, sure, yeah. CBS All Access.
All Access, yeah. It just felt like a brick wall for people not to be able to go in and watch the Star Trek shows. And so I'm just hoping that we make it equitable for creators and we make it equitable for people watching it to be able to afford it. Because I think that this WGA is not only like mixing up stuff in the media sector, but it's also bringing up the idea that like everybody is having a hard time right now, and the wages that we're at right now are not okay for really anyone. I was reading an article that like if you made $70K a year ago, you would have to be making $83K today to have the same amount of money in your bank
Right.
account. And so I think the WGA is opening it up for not only media, but everyone. I mean, it's just like a roundabout way of saying that, like, just in streaming in general and in media, we're having these conversations about how are we serving people media? How are we going to serve these creators and make it equitable for like watching and streaming? I know that was like such a strange journey we went on to get to that point, but yeah.
Well, no, I mean, it is super interesting, right? Like, it is sort of reflecting some of the larger forces that are happening in society and in the entertainment industry as a whole. But it's like, hey, I mean, you got to fight for it, right? And now's the time that the industry is fighting. And I have seen some sort of reactions online that are like, oh, I'm not going to get my favorite show. And, my favorite show really matters to me. And like, I can't believe they're doing this. And it's like, shut up to all of that, right? Like, these people are fighting for their livelihood and for their industry, and yes, our shows might be delayed a little bit, and that will be a minor frustration, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not that bad for what the potential consequences on the line here are for the Writers Guild. And so we should all kind of stand up and say, we support them and we want them to do as well as possible, and we're willing to, suffer whatever consequences we need to suffer in order for them to get the best deal possible.
I completely agree. And I think the outcome of it is it's just going to not only affect media, but it's going to trickle down into other areas of media companies and then outwards. Because I think once we change how much they're making on the writer's floor, it's going to be like, okay, what's next? Because I think there's this energy that like, hey, we need to have equality for everyone, because the way that we're going right now is just it's not making sense.
And fun historical facts, 2 previous writer strikes have impacted Star Trek. The 1988 writer strike cut the second season of The Next Generation short by a few episodes and led to the abominable Shades of Grey, the clip show, the only clip show that Star Trek has ever done. And then your introduction to Star Trek 2009, the first Kelvin timeline movie, was shot entirely during the 2007 writers' strike. So they had no writers on the set for that. They were just shooting off of the script that they had. So yeah, we'll see. We'll figure out in a few months exactly what the impact of the 2023 writers' strike has been on the current era of Star Trek.
Agreed. I was so surprised to hear that fact, but yeah, I think we're going to be okay.
I think we're going to be just fine. Well, the memoirs of Sir Patrick Stewart, which he first announced he was working on in 2020 during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, has gotten itself a title, a cover, and a release date, making it so a memoir but will be released in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook on October 3rd, 2023. The book, which is 432 pages long, will cover the actor's entire life. And according to the press release, quote, from his acclaimed stage triumphs to his legendary on-screen work in the Star Trek and X-Men franchises, Sir Patrick Stewart has captivated audiences around the world and across multiple generations with his indelible command of stage and screen. Now he presents his long-awaited memoir, making it so a revealing portrait of an artist whose astonishing life, from his humble beginnings in Yorkshire, England, to the heights of Hollywood and worldwide acclaim, proves a story as exuberant, definitive, and enduring as the author himself. Sir Patrick also referenced in one of the interviews connected to the announcement that there were early plans to do a book tour. So when that happens in October, I'm sure Sir Patrick will be doing a tour of the US and probably hitting place in the UK too. Madeline, do you think you will be buying the memoir of Sir Patrick Stewart?
I probably won't, but I probably will buy it as a gift for my friend who is a huge Next Gen fan. But the thing that I saw when I was reading this article is that it's 432 pages long. It's so long.
Apparently it's got a lot to say.
A lot. And I am currently reading I Am Spock, and I went to the back of the book right before this. I was like, how long is this? It is 100 page longer than Leonard Nimoy's. It's like, oh my gosh.
Well, I think I Am Spock also comes from like that's not Leonard's whole life, right? Because he did.
No.
Did he do I Am Spock or did he do I Am Not Spock? I think he did I Am Not Spock first, and then he did I Am Spock after.
But the reason he did I Am Spock is because I Am Not Spock flopped.
Yes. People did not like that at all. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. I mean, I'm a huge Patrick Stewart fan. Picard's my favorite Star Trek captain. And he and I have very different lives, both very different upbringings in the UK and then very different lives out here in the US. But I'm always on a personal level, I feel connected to British people who grew up in England and then moved to America, because that's what I did. And I'm always fascinated to sort of learn more about what that transition was like for others. Obviously, I had my own version of that transition. And hey, at 432 pages, there might be a page or two discussing that. I'm also really curious to see, I'm sure he's going to talk a lot about his childhood, which he has, talked about at length in convention appearances. He had quite a difficult childhood. I'm sure he's going to talk about his time at the Royal Shakespeare Company. But I'm actually really curious to see how much of the book ends up being Star Trek focused. I mean, obviously, it's a very important part of his life. The book's called Making It So. He's Captain Jean-Luc Picard. That's the role he's most known for. That will always be the case. But I think he's always kind of presented it as being, well, this was sort of, this is a part of my life. And so I am curious to see how much of the book ends up being about Star Trek and how much ends up being about something else. It's a little bit like, I read a lot of the memoirs of like US presidents, right? And typically they spend a lot more time on the stuff that happened before the presidency, and then they just kind of skip over the presidency a bit because it's like, well, everybody knows this because you all watch the news. And so I wonder if, something similar to that will happen here with the Star Trek stuff. But I'm super interested. He's been working on this for a while. He seems pretty excited about it. So I've already pre-ordered my copy and I'll be excited to get it in October. And hey, see if one of those book tour locations comes anywhere close to the DC area. I'm sure it'll be up there in New York. You take your friend.
Yeah, I was about to say, are you going to try to snag a ticket to a book signing?
Yeah, so I've met him twice before, and he has a wonderful stage presence. And, not such a wonderful in-person presence, at least not in my experience. So, and not to say that he's a bad person or anything, or like, mean or rude or anything. I just always found him to be, the two times I've met him, I found him to be quite cold, which is not a slight on him. He's a human being. He doesn't have to, sort of turn it on for everybody. Just sort of one of those kind of things where it's like you have a relationship with someone on the screen and then you have a relationship with someone in person, and they don't have to be the same, and that's fine. But I would enjoy hearing him talk about the book in person. I would enjoy hearing him read a section of the book. He's also recording the audiobook. So, if you like listening to the sound of Patrick Stewart's voice, which I certainly do, the audiobook's also an option for people who like that as well. So yeah, I mean, I probably will, right? Like he is, he is getting up there a little bit in age. And there might not be too many opportunities to see Sir Patrick Stewart again. He also, he clearly is step back from doing conventions. He doesn't show up at conventions very much anymore. So this might be, sort of one of the last kind of big kind of public out there things that he does before, he sort of retires or just focuses on doing the acting work. And so, yeah, I think if he does come somewhere close to me, I'll probably make the effort.
Yeah, you should. Also, a note, I really like when the authors of memoirs read the memoir themselves. I just think it's so nice.
Yeah, I do too. Because it's so much more personal to them than it is to somebody who's just reading it on their behalf.
Yeah, 100%. It's weird if you're listening to a memoir and then it's read by somebody else. You're like,
yeah, right.
Reading this.
Well, Otoy and Roddenberry Entertainment have revealed more of the Roddenberry archive with the release of a new web portal that features the bridges of all the Starship Enterprises, well, pretty much ever. The new web portal provides fans the opportunity to view 3D recreations of the Enterprise bridge, capturing the Enterprise's NX-01 through the Enterprise G in all the major incarnations and iterations, and there are some unexpected Enterprises as well. You get all the major different versions, plus bridges for the Phase 2 Enterprise and the Ring Ship Enterprise glimpsed in the motion picture, all of which are taken from production drawings or concept drawings from the original Star Trek production teams. In addition to the web portal, the Roddenberry archive has also released more onto YouTube, including some short documentaries about the making of The Next Generation. They also released another of their signature and quite breathtaking short narrative fiction scenes, this time with Spock visiting the grave of Captain Kirk on Viridian 3 and the salvage operation of the Enterprise saucer from the planet's surface. All in all, after a rather confusing and vague announcement a couple of years ago about the Roddenberry archive, it's becoming increasingly clear actually what this thing is. Really is sort of an archive that fans can access, lots of digital assets, lots more on the way. And actually, now we've gotten the chance to see it, it's pretty cool. I was pretty down on this project when it was initially announced because they, in their initial announcement, leaned into talking about blockchain technology and whatever. Nobody cared about that. But seeing the very cool 3D recreations of the Enterprise Bridge available online for any fans to enjoy, that's pretty neat. And this is a project I think I'm actually going to start paying attention to. Madeline, what did you think when you had an opportunity to look around the Roddenberry Archive's latest releases?
Oh my gosh, there was a lot to unpack when I was looking at this. Going off of the blockchain, I'm very curious about the immersive experience of going on to the bridge and seeing all of the details. I'm just wondering how that's gonna work. And then I was wondering, when I was reading that, it made my mind immediately go to, are they going to implement this into VR headsets? Because it was like kind of vague.
Yeah.
It was like immersive experience. I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah, this is sort of a weird one. They announced this a couple of years ago at STLV, and I remember sitting in part of the session, and I was like, I have no idea what these guys are talking about. You know, they had Mike and Denise Akuda and Darren Doctorman on stage, you know, longtime Star Trek production people, and then they had these guys who ran the like OTOY thing, and I was like, and they were talking about blockchain and like, you know, all this grand vision that they had, and it just like I sat there for 45 minutes, and I was like, I couldn't tell you. At the end of the 45-minute session, I couldn't tell you what it is they're trying to do. And it is still a little bit like, okay, well, what is this exactly, right? Like, I mean, clearly, right, it is what it says on the tin. It's the Roddenberry Archive. They're looking to kind of, you know, create this sort of digital repository of assets, these Enterprise bridges, for example, that fans can kind of interact with. What the sort of final form of that is, though, who knows, right? Like, I agree with you. It feels like a no-brainer that they import these bridges into VR, because if you really want to make it immersive, you know, put it in VR. You can be on the Phase 2 bridge, you can be on the Enterprise C bridge, you can be on the NX-01 bridge, you can be on the Enterprise D bridge, you can be on the Enterprise E bridge from First Contact, and then switch over to the one from Insurrection, and then switch over to the one from Nemesis. I mean, they really have all the sort of different variations. They've got early season TNG, they've got late season TNG, they've got the Enterprise A from the end of the Voyage Home, they've got it from The Final Frontier, they've got it from The Undiscovered Country. Like, it's really cool, actually, and I want to spend more time on the site, like, you know, sort of looking around these bridges. And I started to watch some of the, like, the little documentaries that they've kind of put on YouTube. I got about halfway through the Next Generation one, prepping for this story, and it was actually really high production values. It was really good. And I mean, the thing that people have sort of, like, the one that went viral this past week was that little Spock clip where it's Spock visiting, you know, Captain Kirk's grave on Viridian 3. And like the point of that, it seems like I'm not fully sure like what those are supposed to be and the role that they're supposed to play, but they're actually really cool. And like I don't necessarily need them to have a role because I enjoy watching them, and they've done a few now. It's really cool. Like, it's awesome. And so yeah, I'm really interested in this, even though I think they've done a very bad job of explaining like exactly what it is.
Yeah, I agree. And I need to point out a part of this that kind of blew my mind when I was reading it. I pasted like the exact quote. So they say that there's work that has been completed to bring Majel Roddenberry's voice to life as the Enterprise computer based on phonetic recordings she made in 2008.
Yeah, which is awesome because
that is crazy.
Yeah. So, you know, they've talked for a while about how she did a series of recordings before she died. And there's been this sort of like, okay, well, where is it? Why have we not heard it? Right? Why has it not showed up on Star Trek? And Rod Roddenberry at Star Trek Las Vegas last year said that part of that reason was because she did record the phonics, right? The like all of the different noises that you make that then you stitch together digitally to create all the words that you need. But I guess she didn't record everything. It was not like the full catalog. It was just most of the catalog. So I think they've had to do some like AI digital stuff to kind of fill in the missing bits. But it's great that it's ready now. It's great that it's done. And hopefully it does mean that we find it, you know, showing up in more places, in more places than just the Roddenberry Archive. But also, what better place for it to show up than the Roddenberry Archive, given, you know, she herself is a Roddenberry.
100%. And this is the perfect time for that. It just amazed me that they were even thinking about that in 2008. But I took a look around the site, and I think it's so cool because there's so many ships on there I just never heard of or had ever been on my mind. I was like, oh, whoa, what's this one? So
Yeah.
it's fun.
Yeah, I loaded it, and the first one that came up was the Ring Ship, and like I know the Ring Ship, Star Trek motion picture, it's on the wall, but I was like, well, where does this bridge come from? And you start looking around it, and it's like, wow, this is weird, and this is cool, and I was like, did someone just make this up, or is it a thing? And then there's a little caption, and I started reading the caption, and they said that they took it was one of Matt Jeffrey's original concept drawings for the bridge of the Enterprise in the original series, and they, sort of created this 3D version of it as sort of an homage to that. And like, that's really cool. And I just, I thought that was really cool. And then I was like, oh, this thing actually seems pretty awesome. So yeah, I'm excited to see more from the Roddenberry archive for sure.
Me too. I think it's super cool. And I love the idea too. I know Disney has partnerships with them, but they have these like VR experiences where you put on a whole set and then you, like walk into them. And I can so see this being implemented into like the physical VR experience or physical experience where you get to go into a room and just be immersed in the bridge. And I think that would be so cool. And they could easily like bring that to conventions with tech,
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that'd be great. Well, and lastly this week, it never rains, but it pours in the soundtrack world. And Lakeshore Records, after releasing the Star Trek Picard Season 3 soundtrack to coincide with the series finale on April 20th, then turned around a week later and finally released the Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 1 soundtrack. The soundtrack, which is available now on all major platforms for streaming or purchase, was composed by Star Trek Prodigy composer Nami Melamad, with the series opening and closing titles composed by Jeff Russo. The 29 tracks include music from all 10 of the first season's episodes, and having listened to it through a bunch of times already since it was released, this soundtrack is great. Nami Melamad rules, and Everyone Wants a Piece of Pike is my favorite track on the album, if you were wondering. Madeline, are you a fan of Star Trek music?
Yes, I love soundtracks, and this one's just super good, but I cannot get over how amazing the track titles are. It's so good.
Do you have a favorite track title?
Oh gosh, I wrote down so many of them. I love Gorn But Not Forgotten.
Yep.
Are you a Vulcan or a Vulcant?
Yep. Put a T'Pring on it.
Yes, that one's so good. Will you be my Vulcantine? Oh, good.
I also like, I'm notorious for not liking this episode, but When the Hammer Falls.
Oh yeah, I know. That was just so funny. I'm like, oh my God. They were just sitting there. They're like, we need track names. Let's make them silly.
Yeah, well, I think so. I think Nami is a little bit of a follower of Michael Giacchino, who did the soundtrack for the Kelvin Timeline movies. And he is also notorious for these like punny track titles. And so I think she does it as a homage to what he does, which I think is wonderful because it's really fun.
Oh, I agree. It's super fun. And the Kelvin Timelines music, I have it on my playlist. It's really funny because sometimes when I used to drive a car, one of my family members would be in the car and it would be on like shuffle, and then you just hear like the theme song, and my parents would sit there and be like, oh my gosh.
Hey, you can't beat Enterprising Young Men. That is a great piece of music.
Oh, it's so good. They're all so good. But yeah, I love these track titles, and I love listening to it, especially when I'm working, because it's like the perfect thing to have in the background and not distract you, really.
Yeah, we're feasting on Star Trek music at the moment, and feasting on really good soundtracks. I mean, the Picard Season 3 soundtrack and the Strange New Worlds Season 1 soundtrack coming 1 week apart, given that those are my two favorite seasons of Star Trek music that we've gotten since the show returned in 2017. It's just amazing. I mean, I've been like alternating back and forth between them because I also listen to a lot of Star Trek music while I work, and I've been alternating back and forth between them because like I've wanted to listen to both because they're both so good. And yeah, there's just like I knew from having watched the episodes that the Strange New Worlds music had a lot of those sort of like 60s flourishes to them, but I had not quite appreciated until I listened to the music just in isolation how many of those flourishes there are, and I really like them. I mean, it definitely is a whole vibe in the way that Picard season 3 was a whole vibe of like tying back to, you know, the sort of 90s music. The Strange New Worlds music is a completely different vibe, but one that also resonates very strongly with that, you know, that sort of iconic, distinctive TOS music.
Yes, I totally agree. And also a suggestion for any listeners. One thing I really enjoy is the Loki soundtrack. The person who created that soundtrack,
Natalie Holt.
Natalie Holt, yes. She made it so it was all science fiction kind of put together. And it is so fun because if you've listened to any music from Doctor Who, from Star Wars, from Star Trek, if you're kind of like a fan of that sort of world, you listen to the music from Loki and you can point out like, oh, that's from Star Trek and that's from Star Wars. And it's really fun to listen to it and just be like, oh, I know where that sound comes from. That's like the Doctor Who theme. So it's so fun. And I just have to point that out because I have a blast listening to that.
All right. Well, we've talked about the facts. And now let's speculate on what's going to happen in the future of Star Trek.
You make some very good points, Captain. But it's still all speculation and theory.
So each week, my guest and I give you a wish or theory we're nurturing about any of the shows or the future of the franchise. So Madeline, let's hear your theory or wish for this week.
My wish, I thought long and hard about this because I have so many. I could say AOS4, I could say all the different things, but I think my main one is that I have been reading Leonard Nimoy's memoir, and a part that really stuck out to me is the fan clubs and how they used to have like hyper local fan clubs, and all I want is to go into a room with other fans, put on our little badges and our silly little costumes and sit there and talk about Star Trek.
Madeline, have you ever been to a Star Trek convention?
I have. So I have been to STLV. I went.
Oh, cool. Which year did you go?
Gosh, I could not tell you. It had to have been 2015 or 16.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and so I actually I can't tell you. It was the year after Leonard Nimoy passed, or the convention that was after he passed, and the vibes were really sad. It was really sad. Like it was hard to go.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, but I feel like I'm a baby fan in the Star Trek, you know, like I'm not completely an expert on it, so sometimes I feel intimidated, but I did not feel that way at a Star Trek convention. I loved it. Yeah.
Did you dress up?
I did not dress up for that, but I have dressed up before. My main convention I went to was I've gone to San Diego Comic-Con.
Yeah.
9 times.
Oh wow. You are a real San Diego Comic-Con attendee.
Oh, I am. And I was a journalist for a really long time. And I will do my little brag is that I got to interview the cast of Star Trek Discovery once.
Oh, very cool.
Very cool. Yeah.
How much do you have to fight for those tickets to go to San Diego?
Oh, I had to fight so hard before.
How many people have you killed, Madeline?
Oh,
come
God.
clean now.
I can't tell you my secrets, but yeah, it was the fight to get into San Diego Comic-Con was so hard, and I've just given up now. I don't have the energy anymore.
So no more SDCC for you.
Not now, not unless a work or someone decides to send me.
Yeah.
Like, please let me go.
Would you? I mean, you expressed an interest for spaces in which you could dress up and go and talk about Star Trek. Would you consider going back to a Star Trek convention?
100%. Yeah. So Las Vegas is actually my hometown.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So it would be pretty easy for me to go back and to go to STLV, but I'd love to go back just because now I feel like I got more shows I've watched in Star Trek, and this year I'm watching The Next Generation, so I will have more knowledge than I do currently. But yeah.
Where are you up to in The Next Generation?
I'm at the very beginning. I literally started last weekend with my friend. She came over and she sat me in front of the TV, hostage style, and she said, watch TNG.
That is awesome. All right, let me give you my wish for this week.
Yes, I'm ready.
Which is that, and this is sort of it's a macro wish. It applies to all of the live action Star Trek shows: Discovery, Starfleet Academy, Strange New Worlds, all of them. Picard season 3 ended the Borg forever, right? I mean, other shows and writers could bring them back, but like the point of the season was it did away with them forever, right? You were ending this story. And one of the things that I walked away from that season with this really palpable sense of is that I want Star Trek to do more of that kind of thing again, right?
Yeah.
Like the current Star Trek shows have been very shy about changing up the dynamics of the galaxy in which they find themselves, right? Like the 32nd century Discovery stuff. Yes, there's, like the burn and the Federation went away and then it came back. But it's also like you don't have that same sense of you've got Klingons and Romulans and Cardassians and the Federation and like their relationship, and then it changes, and sort of the Deep Space Nine-y thing of sometimes things change and the Klingons are your friend one moment and then they're your enemy the next, and there's these sort of big kind of galaxy changing things that happen. A lot of the ones that have happened in live action Star Trek are things that in the current iteration are things that happen off screen, right? The Romulan supernova that is referenced in Star Trek 2009, and then you sort of skip over it in the current Star Trek that we've got to Star Trek Picard, and like it's happened and you're well past the fallout point of something like that. What I really want moving forward, and that Star Trek Picard reminded me that I really liked, is Star Trek shows and writers who are not afraid to play with the toys that are in the box and like not put those toys back in exactly the same place they were at the very end of playtime, right? Like change things up, mix things up, do things, evolve this universe, not your sort of generic sci-fi stuff, but like the sort of Star Trek stuff. Right, like I'm really excited that the Klingons are coming back in season 2 of Strange New Worlds, because like season 1 of Discovery did what I'm saying, right? Like they created a war with the Klingons. I thought that was really cool, right? That it had always been hinted that one had existed, and now we finally got the chance to see it. And yes, it's a prequel, so, it's not like they can change things up too much. They can't go contacting the Romulans outside of the sort of creative way they did it in A Quality of Mercy. But, like, there are stories you can tell that contribute to what we already know, that do play with the toys in the sandbox. Maybe you could see at some point first contact with the Cardassians, for example, and, like, what's the fallout of that type thing. You can have these kind of pieces of history and politics and like the wider universe that you actually play with, rather than just sort of like moving discreetly through something that's otherwise quite static. And I just want Star Trek, live action Star Trek, to do a bit more of that. So that's my wish. Madeline, what do you think?
I agree. And going off your point, I think an episode I'm very excited about, and I think is going to be so interesting in season 2, is this Roger Rabbit style below decks
Yep.
mashup. I think that's going to do exactly what you're thinking, because it's just gonna kind of flip everything on its head, and I really want to see that. I love when they play with things, and obviously I'm a huge fan of the Kelvin timeline. I want an AOS4 so deeply. I don't think it's ever gonna happen, but
fingers crossed. It should. They should want to make Star Trek movies.
They should, and I wish we would have more fun movies. I don't know exactly which Star Trek movie it is, so please give me your knowledge. But the one that is set in real time, 70s, 80s, that one with...
Yes, Voyage Home, Star Trek 4.
Voyage Home, yeah.
The first Star Trek 4.
I want something like that again. I think that could be so fun, and I feel like that's kind of hinted at in the prequel for Strange New Worlds, where we see Kirk in a... Canadian store.
Oh, yeah, in the revolving door.
In the revolving door, which that line, I need to know if I'm crazy, but when he says, I'm from space, I'm like, nobody, you're from Indiana. What are you talking about? I don't know if that line confused you as much as it confused me, but my Twitter feed was just like, why is he saying that? That doesn't make any sense.
Do you have a theory or a wish for Discovery, Section 31, Starfleet Academy, Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, or Prodigy that you'd like to share? Tweet them to me at Weekly Trek, or email them to me at weeklytrek@thetricordertransmissions.com, and I might feature your theory in a future episode. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode of Weekly Trek. Thank you so much to my guest, Madeline Potts, for joining me today. Madeline, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation?
They can contact me on Twitter at @TheRealMadeline.
And you can find this show on Twitter at Weekly Trek and me at Alexander T. Perry. And if you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And please check out some of the other great shows on the Tricorder Transmissions. And if you like our shows, please also consider becoming a Patreon of Tricorder, which you can find at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And lastly, if you're looking for Star Trek news on the internet, I hope you will turn to trekcore.com. Well, thank you, Madeline. Thank you to all of my listeners. And until next week, live long and prosper.